very happy to be here. My name is Jeff Spivak. I'm a partner at Grant Thornton in our advisory practice. I'm going to be moderating today's session on risk management and security equaling success. So that's a great topic, a very important topic in the cloud environment today. And we've brought together a group of terrific panelists, people from a variety of companies and backgrounds, different perspectives, both from a functional as well as a business perspective. But before I introduce them and have them introduce themselves, we just want to get a sense as we kind of frame some of our responses to your questions. We want to get a sense of the people who are in the group. We want to kind of first understand who in the group are from B2B type companies and B2C. So B2B, raise of hands. B2C? Okay. And we also wanted to get a sense of size of firms. So companies 250 million and less, 250 to $1 billion, over $1 billion. Okay. I think we got everybody. Okay. So again, I've been with Grant Thornton here, a partner in our Greater Bay Area practice. I've been with the firm for 16 years. And I'm very pleased to present our panel. Frank Bruno, Director and Senior Business Strategist from Iron Mountain. John Moss, Senior Vice President and General Counsel for Salesforce. Jerry Kreelish, VP Marketing and Products from Prospectus. Rand Wacker, VP of Product from Cloud Passage. And Oris Dearman, Director from the advisory practice of Grant Thornton. So some new names. So that wasn't a trick question or a trick presentation up there. But why don't I ask the panel to briefly introduce themselves and their organizations. And John, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I'm the trick because I think it says somebody else up there, but I'm filling in for Roberto. I'm John Moss, General Counsel for Commercial at Salesforce.com. Some of you probably know Salesforce.com. We're an enterprise cloud company focusing on CRM platform and some other areas, marketing. And I've been there 7 years, had past history as general counsel of some other internet companies and Oracle, which was then a smaller company, and started off in law practice. So what I do is I run the commercial contracts, so got a global team of people that handles all our commercial contracts for customers and partners around the world.
Okay, please. My name is Jerry Greelish, and I head up the marketing and product areas of Prospectus. Prospectus is a venture-backed company. Intel Capital is our primary investor. Security solution, software, typically deployed by large enterprises to keep sensitive data out of the cloud. So many cloud service providers, application providers, partner with us to help them overcome objections during their sales process about loss of control of certain sensitive data elements, for instance, like medical record fields, et cetera, that enterprises don't want to put out in public cloud environments. So we typically would be deployed as an intercepting piece of software, and it replaces those sensitive values with either encrypted or tokenized values. So what goes to the cloud then is not the sensitive data any longer. So based in the DC area, the company's headquartered in Toronto.
Frank?
I'm not John Barufka. I'm
But you
Frank
are from
Bruno.
Iron Mountain.
But I am from Iron Mountain, Fortune 1000. We're the leader in records and information management. My business group is the Iron Mountain Intellectual Property Management Group. And many of you know us as an escrow agent, managing source code escrows. We're here to introduce a new service that basically enables SaaS and enterprise markets. And by helping buyers and sellers overcome the risk objections by helping them establish a contingency plan, what we're actually doing is helping the subscriber protect their investment in mission critical technology. And as a result, we're helping SaaS companies close more deals faster that way. And by introducing the trust element into the equation, we're able to help them get over the risk objections of doing business so that they can focus on doing business. Thanks.
Horace.
Horace Dearman. I'm a director in our advisory services practice of Grant Thornton here in the Bay Area. I work with Jeff quite extensively, mainly focusing on security and privacy. I help lead our special attestation reporting practice here, which entails the service organization control reports that some of us are probably aware of. And I hope to bring probably more of an auditor role or auditor perspective to this panel. You know, maybe that's good or bad depending on which side of the audit you're on. But really, I'm here to shed some light, perhaps on some risk and security aspects that newer and maybe less established cloud companies face when they're getting into the market.
Rand Wacker of Cloud Passage. We help do security and compliance automation for enterprise cloud infrastructure. So if you're doing development or running your services in a public or private cloud environment, we help you achieve the regulatory compliance controls like PCI and HIPAA and SOC 2 in those environments. Previous security experience with Cisco, Ironport, and Oracle. So very happy to be here today.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being a part of today's session. And we really want this to be a learning experience for all of us. I mean, we not only exchange knowledge amongst ourselves, but together with you. So as we run through some of the questions that we have today, number one, if there are any follow-ups that you have that you're thinking about to any of the individuals on the panel, or you have your own unique questions, feel free to just raise your hand, and as we kind of go through the set of questions that we'll have, and we'd like you to talk with us. So the first question I'm actually positioning for the entire panel, and we'll just go, and maybe Rand, we can start with you. And as you look at your organization, being in the business that you're in, where do you see some of the trending risks for cloud-based delivery models today? When we kind of look at that, they may be a little bit different for larger companies than they are for smaller companies, but from your organization's perspective, how do you see what's trending today?
Interestingly, for anyone in an as-a-service delivery model, even if you're not in a financial or regulatory mandated vertical, I think the risk of a broad breach and the impact to your brand is really high. Just over the past few weeks, we've seen major breaches reported at LinkedIn, Twitter, Zendesk, companies which don't necessarily fall into the traditional finance or healthcare markets, but for which the impact and the reporting and the cost of that is significant. The attackers are not after just credit card numbers. They're not just after specific financial data. They're after passwords. They're after usernames. They're after accounts where they can get into other organizations. And so understanding that, and I think in particular a resource that anyone in here should read, there's a well-known one, the Verizon Breach Incident Report, which everyone here I'm sure has read. Very useful to understand and see what they recommend there.
Frank, what about you? What is Iron Mountain seeing as current risks and exposure, and what do you see happening 6 to 12 months down the road for your company?
Well, we're involved with a lot of technology transactions, and commonly at the 11th hour, there's always that question about risk, about the long-term viability of the seller. And many of them are having to deal with questions about the security of their applications. Many of them are having to deal with questions about whether or not they're going to be around a couple of years, and oftentimes they're just not able to address that adequately enough. And as a result, a lot of those deals fall through. And if I could just quote some statistics here, 80% of new businesses go under within the first 5 years, according to the National Business Incubator Association and a study conducted by Inc. magazine. SaaS companies are 40% more likely to go out of business than their on-prem competitors. Now, from where we sit today, the current statistic is about 80% of SaaS companies don't currently offer a failover guarantee to their prospects, and as a result, about half of those deals fall through. So, I mean, that's obviously a bad trend, because the SaaS company will ultimately fail, according to that statistic. It will affect the subscribers who are left holding the bag, who can't get their data out for whatever reason. It'll affect other players in the ecosystem, like infrastructure players who have to deal with high attrition rates, and now they have to sell more in order for them to make the same amount of money in the previous year. And the trend that we're seeing is that it's becoming more of a front page issue. And every time you hear about a security breach or an extended outage, this comes up more and more often. So the trend that we're seeing is there's a lot of companies calling us, and they want help, and they want to figure out how to overcome that barrier to closing business, so that they can gain traction in the marketplace. And you can read plenty of books from the buy side to understand the dynamic, the buying signals, the buying dynamic for technology, and it all points back to help me figure out how to satisfy governance, risk, and compliance, and to mitigate my risk so that you're a safe bet, so that I know that if something happened to you, I can get my data out and migrate to a new solution. And you want to do that as efficiently as possible. So creating a contingency plan is very important, and asking the what if questions and then addressing those. And I see a lot more small emerging technology providers asking the question, what can I do to ensure that my clients can survive me if I don't make it? And really that's been what we've been doing for the past 2-3 years. I see the trend, continuing to flow in a positive direction, because I think ultimately, all the people at this conference are here to help the attendees figure out, how to overcome, how to figure out a solution to their particular problem. Whether it's security or compliance, it is all about risk and mitigating that risk so that we can enable SaaS in the enterprise markets. Everybody's doing great. Mind you, there's a lot of activity, a lot of buzz, a lot of prospects, a lot of good things happening in the market, and the market is growing at a rate that's far exceeding on-prem installations. Fantastic. But we're missing a big piece of the opportunity, which is the enterprise markets. And as soon as companies like Procter & Gamble and Chevron can entrust the cloud, boy, you want to talk about growth? This is the business to be in right here. Thanks.
So John, just moving to more of a regulatory and even from a legal perspective, I'm sure there are many aspects of where your company is evolving to in the cloud, and other organizations you're dealing with, raises a lot of challenges and risks from your perspective and your functional perspective. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So when I look at the trending risks, 5 years ago, I would have said that for cloud companies, the risk of like a service outage, the availability risk, and the security risk of a security breach were probably about equal, at least in the eyes of the community, in the eyes of the customers and the regulators. Today, I think the industry has pretty much, not completely, but has gotten over the hump of availability. The availability is pretty good. The business continuity is pretty good, but the security risk, as my co-panelists have said, has just continued to increase because the threat has escalated. You've got these state actors, you've got very, very sophisticated people out there trying to do very sophisticated things to you and to your systems. So those risks, I think, are clearly front and center. I would say in the next 6 to 12 months, what do I see as the big risks? I think in a couple of areas. One is around the need for disclosure. So we're seeing a lot of disclosures now. I think some of my co-panelists already referred to that. When something goes wrong, when you have to disclose it. The U.S., I don't know if you noticed, but a few months ago, the White House issued cybersecurity decree. President Obama was, waiting for Congress to do something. They didn't do anything. He was really, really afraid of what's happening with China, and so he went ahead and issued this decree, and it calls for more cooperation between government and industry. I think, we've got that. In Europe, they're rewriting the data protection regulations, so now it's a little bit of a hodgepodge in Europe. You've got a European-wide data directive, but each company is allowed to implement it in its own way. They're rewriting that, and so it's now going to be one unified set of data protection rules across Europe, which is a good thing. However, it comes with a cost, and the cost is that the levels of the requirements are going to go up. The penalties are going to go way up. Right now, it's rare to get a penalty of more than, say, 100,000 euros for a data protection breach in Europe, at least a penalty from a government. They're talking about raising it to 2% of turnover, which is 2% of your sales, basically, your annual sales, because they realize that 100,000 euros doesn't mean very much to Google, but 2% of sales might. And so we're going to see a lot more, I think, a lot more disclosures, a lot more pressure on companies to disclose these problems when they come up. And then there's the regulatory burden that all of these regulations impose. And most of them, I would say, are actually not all that burdensome. If you design your systems in a way that addresses privacy, which is what the regulators are telling you to do, what's known as security by design or privacy by design, things like having a coherent privacy policy, following it, and paying attention to the data that you're collecting from your consumers and your customers, disposing of that data when you no longer need it. Those things sort of make sense, but some of the things that don't really make sense for the cloud, for example, are audits. So almost every single regulator, this is one thing, they don't share too many things in common. One thing that they all seem to share in common is they're all telling their regulated companies to audit their cloud vendors, as in go in and sit in their offices and do an on-site security audit. Now, if you think about the cloud computing model, right, you think about multi-tenancy and the one-to-many model and scale and efficiency, on-site audits don't scale very well. And the cloud industry is trying to implement sort of, the one-to-many model around security disclosures that it does around everything else around computing, which is, we're going to provide the information and you can, find it on the internet or find it behind a firewall or whatever, but not do the on-site audits. And it seems like an arcane area, but I think every cloud vendor right now is sort of is feeling the pain of this.
John, we'll come back to the regulatory question later because sometimes, and including in Europe where the regs are being rewritten, it feels like the regulators are not keeping pace with the technology. So the things that are even being proposed aren't necessarily aligned with how the technology is designed. And that's going to create real difficulties for companies, already does. But we'll talk about that a little bit more. I know you're also talking about, the issue around audit. And Oris, I pose this question for you, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the, the risks here from an auditor's perspective, because, I think what John's saying is true. I mean, the cloud vendors are being looked at as very, very carefully from a multitude of perspectives. What is the audit field doing or seeing in terms of risk in this space?
Sure. So there's been a lot of change and advances from an audit perspective over the past 2 years or so now. Back in mid-2011, the old SAS 70 standard kind of went away, and they brought out these new service organization control reports that utilize something called the trust services principles, and that covers security, availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, and privacy. It provides a nice framework that's public and well known and allows companies to be measured against. But the real trick to that is that it is a well-known framework, it is a common framework, and it addresses quite nicely a lot of other type regulations. So what we're seeing a lot of companies doing is either taking a trust services principles approach through a SOC audit or an ISO audit or FSMA or FedRAMP if you're providing services to the federal government, whatever the framework is. But the point is you have a defined control structure that's being tested and looked at. But what that enables you to do is to map that against other regulations. So at least from a risk management viewpoint, you understand what your delta is if a new regulation is coming on board. Now, as far as complications go, and this is why I think breaches will continue over the next 6, 12 months and on, is that in this cloud model, you often get confused over who has ultimate responsibility for what. So you might have an infrastructure being stood up that's hosting various applications. Maybe it's a payment application if you're taking online payments and you're subject to PCI or payment card industry standards. Well, to me as an auditor, or if I'm a customer looking in, okay, that's great. I see you're certified from an infrastructure perspective, but what about my payment application? Is there going to be something that's missing, and who's really responsible for testing and reporting on that? So I think as we continue to be more diversified and in the cloud, it's important to really spell out ownership and not make assumptions that somebody's responsible for security over this or monitoring of that and reporting on it. So in the next 6 to 12 months, I'm hoping that will be addressed. I know the Cloud Security Alliance recently came out and endorsed or supported the SOC 2 reports, at least here in the U.S. So I think it's starting to trend towards more of a centralized standard for cloud, rather than having a bunch of different frameworks out there and everybody trying to figure it out.
So, Jerry, let's switch gears a little bit. As we kind of talk about it, as we've heard from your co-panelists here, there are lots of challenges. We look at the cloud business as a future technology in many respects, but from a risk management perspective, one might say, run away. It's just like there's so many concerns here. And the fact of the matter is that the majority of cloud-based players are smaller. They're up-and-comers. I mean, the cost to entry is negligible in many respects. So you have so many companies, and the statistic of 80% greater than the 40% fail rate, and whatever the statistics here are, it would raise great concern. So if you're guiding people who are considering cloud options for their organization, whether they are a provider of service and looking to outsource certain of their capabilities to cloud providers, or they're just pure buyers of cloud services, how do they get comfort around this? What kind of processes did they go through to look at vendors, to really assess whether or not they get it and they understand what they're going to need from a security perspective? What's going to happen if for some reason that organization goes away? What happens to their data? How do they gain comfort that they're going to be able to really maintain their business and not be at significant risk?
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge because a lot of the more innovative solutions are coming from smaller organizations, and enterprises are looking to adopt those, and they're running into these challenges. I mean, we have one customer that we're helping out right now. It's a smaller cloud provider based in California, so the cloud's hovering over California, but it's a German-based multinational, and we're helping to deploy that cloud for them in China. So just think about all the competing laws there. It takes, it's a lot of fun meetings between the teams in China, Germany, a lot of lawyers in the meetings and compliance folks. And the way that we've gone about helping them solve this is to basically, come up with an approach where they can retain control of this data themselves, right? So many of our partners, I guess one of the answers is there's clever technology approaches that need to be explored, whether it's solutions like a prospectus or other solutions that can bring the required level of either certification or security to help convince these larger enterprise customers that you are indeed a provider that they can trust. There's an interesting piece from Joseph Feynman at Gartner that I recommend you all take a look at, because he really talks about how in the next 3 to 5 years, the security posture of your cloud is going to be a competitive advantage for you if you can actually point to elements that you've deployed either inside of your cloud environment or through your partner ecosystem to help you address some of these issues, whether it be security or things like data residency, where it's difficult to move. Even let's say the European laws, they might actually gel together, but then they're different and conflict with the US laws that are different than China, et cetera. So you have these various regions that have these competing laws, and the whole idea of a border is antithetical to the cloud, but you're a cloud provider, right? So how do you deal with that? So what Gartner's pointing out is that for those cloud providers that can figure it out, it's going to be a real competitive advantage, because the environment that your enterprise customers need to live in is this convoluted, complex environment. And one of the things that we've recently seen is that it's not only the amount of folks or cloud providers that are coming to us to help them overcome these barriers of the sale. It's growing greatly, but it's not just new deals. It's existing deals where now large enterprise CISOs are being asked to go back and control these rogue clouds that have been used, right? So it's not just your new deals that are perhaps in danger, but existing deals that are now coming under scrutiny of the enterprises. So, but besides the technology, clearly there's the certifications and various things that can be done contractually to try to make sure that folks feel comfortable with the data loss. But those are just some of the things that I've been seeing, or the ability to get their data back.
Anybody else on the panel and looking at cloud vendors, have a process in mind that your organization follows to really assess viability and of that enterprise, and whether or not they're a company that can, that even if they're not around for the long term, that you're going to have the ability to get your data and be able to operate that element of your business. Is that a risk for your other organizations on the panel?
Well, I can comment to that, because that's most of the companies that we talk to are dealing with that very issue, and it's not easy to figure out how to get your data back when you really don't know where it is, for one. Better than 60% of all companies subscribing to SaaS don't know that it may be hosted by a third-party managed service provider. And even if they did have access to the address or the environment, there are procedures, very complex procedures, to detangle your data from a multi-tenant database architecture. So it's a problem. It's definitely a problem, and we've been dealing with the what ifs of technology transfer deals for about 30 years.
It's not just getting it back, it's what format you'll get it back in, right?
Is it going to be usable?
Right.
You might get something back, and if you were to print it, it would fill up this entire room filled with paper. You wouldn't be able to ever use it again. Iron Mountain takes very precautionary measures when we subscribe to the cloud. We're a big client of Salesforce.com, and we use a lot of the plugins as well to support our business. And Salesforce, they did do it right. We're able to download our data.
You're just making John
on a nightly basis. Well, not just doing that, but we will ask them for a discount after the bigger discount afterwards. But actually, they're a client of ours too. But that's really it. It's about contingency planning and making sure that you've tested that plan. And the services that Iron Mountain provides to secure relationships, that just enables the contingency plan to take place. But when you're executing a contingency plan, it takes time. And having access to the application, having access to your data while you execute your contingency plan is so very important, and making sure that you can get it out. And it's become a standard within our organization. We have it's got to be at least a 400-page security assessment program that we put our vendors through. So it's a pretty stringent process. And if you're on the sell side of things, it's so important to anticipate these objections, because they'll usually come up right with pen in hand, before the ink hits the paper. So.
Rand, let's switch gears here a little bit and talk a little bit about companies who basically are looking to get into the SaaS business. And the software company, they basically have had a box product for all these years, and they're looking to move to a cloud-based product. What are some of the concerns, challenges, and risks that they face and that they need to manage internally, and how do they articulate that to their client base?
Right. Well, the obvious answer is that when you move from a box product that your customers are running on their site to a SaaS-hosted product that you're now running in your facilities, the customers are going to care about their data. I mean, that's the obvious thing that's going to be a stumbling block, and now they're going to ask you to prove your security so they feel their data is as safe as it was in their own data center. The interesting challenge there is how do you prove the compliance, and what is it customers are looking for, and what are the check boxes you need before so that you can remove any sales barriers to these kinds of issues. It's even more challenging, and I think a good example, Salesforce, again, we're all big fans of what they've done over time, improving the SaaS model and the security there and the trust there. But things have evolved quite a bit, especially for small companies now that are building SaaS offerings on top of other cloud services themselves. So if you're building a SaaS offer that is hosted on an infrastructure as a service provider like an Amazon or a Rackspace, or in some type of shared private cloud or something like that, you have a whole new level of difficulty in proving compliance, because in those environments, it's actually security and compliance is a shared responsibility between you as a SaaS vendor and then whoever is providing your infrastructure layer. There was a lot of discussion of this at the Amazon Summit here in San Francisco just last week, and all of the cloud providers are eager to show, we've certified our stack for PCI and HIPAA up to this level. Now you, the vendor that's building on top of that, must certify the pieces above. And to further complicate things, that is not something that all auditors yet get. And so we're a huge proponent. We see every SaaS company we're talking to caring about PCI, HIPAA, SSA 16, and SOC 2. And the level of understanding where not only are you proving your policies, but that your infrastructure as a service provider does as well, is a real challenge. And so a lot of people are looking out there for, you need to be aware that your auditor, as you go into this, understands that model. Often it's a good opportunity to actually leverage your provider's auditor in some cases. But in general, getting back to the original question of what are the risks and challenges as you're moving from box to a SaaS offering, it's proving to the customer that you are protecting their data to a level that's as high, or in some cases you can prove higher compliance as well. That's one of the reasons people move to the cloud, is they don't want to take on that burden.
So we talk about the cost of compliance, we talk about the challenges and the need to comply from both an audit perspective and a regulatory perspective. And John, I'd like to come back to some of the things you were talking about earlier from a regulatory perspective. There's so much that has to be managed, and this is, while individually none of these activities may be burdensome, but in aggregate, it creates a huge cost crunch for organizations. How's a company like Salesforce managing it, and how would younger, smaller companies manage their way through all the different regulatory and compliance matters they may have to face in trying to build their cloud business?
I think the key thing is to get in early and understand, hire a lawyer. I'm not advertising for lawyers, but in this case, it's not necessarily such a bad idea to sit down and help you map out, what are the rules and what are the forward-looking rules that you're going to need to comply with over the next, 3-5 years, to the extent that you can, pull out the crystal ball. Here's an example. In the U.S., where the privacy regulation is, significantly sort of, less robust, shall we say, than in Europe, the FTC, which is the main privacy regulator in the U.S., is completely focused right now on mobile apps, right? So anyone here developing mobile apps? I'm surprised not more. So if you're developing mobile apps, it's a really good idea they've got a really nice little video that you can watch. It says, here's what you need to think about if you're a mobile app developer, right? It's not so hard. Focus, on what's going to be impacting me down the road. In Europe, there actually are resources that do make it easy. I think, for Europe, it is true. I mean, going to your comment that they don't necessarily understand the technology. I mean, I think that's the same for most regulators everywhere. But there's something a lot deeper that you need to understand if you're going to try to get privacy right in Europe, in that their whole philosophy is different. In the U.S., most people who use the web, sort of accept some trade-off between privacy and and convenience, right, and use of these social and mobile technologies, right? In Europe, they do not accept that trade-off. They think, I love my technology. In some ways, Europe, has been far ahead of us in mobile technology, for example, and then in the U.S., but they do not accept the premise that there's a trade-off between that and privacy, and that is they view privacy as a fundamental human right. It comes out of a lot of the sort of totalitarian intrusions on privacy in the 20th century, and it's fundamentally sort of built into their culture. So they don't necessarily see that as a contradiction. And that works itself out in various ways. For example, in the U.S., we follow mostly an opt-out approach, meaning that basically you can collect data of your users as long as you tell them. And if it's their job to tell you if they want to opt out, if they want to come back to you. That's why you get all these things in the mail that say, this is my bank's privacy policy. And you get those, like 10 times a year, like, what is this, right? This is they're telling you, right? And so if you want to opt out, you've got to tell them. That's the US model. Europe, continental Europe, it's the reverse. You cannot collect that data, you cannot use it, you cannot do anything with it unless you get the affirmative consent, unless you get the opt-in. Different way of looking at privacy, for example. In the US, it's presumed if you collect data, you can kind of do whatever you want with it, unless the law specifically says, you can't, which it does in many cases. For example, if you're in healthcare or in finance or another regulated area. In Europe, it's the opposite. If you're collecting data, there's a presumption that you really can't do anything with it unless you have a legitimate reason to do it. And you can't move it out of Europe unless it's to a country that the Europeans say is okay. So a bunch of those, there's some interesting countries on that list. For example, Argentina, Israel, countries that you wouldn't necessarily think of the top of your list, but the US is actually one not because we have great data privacy, but because we have negotiated this arrangement with Europe that's known as the safe harbor. So here's some free legal advice. If you haven't signed up for this EU safe harbor, do it. It's cheap insurance, put it that way. All right, I'm a lawyer. I'll talk forever if you let me.
I'm going to throw out one more question to the panel, and then a couple of questions from the audience. Earlier we heard from one of our panelists about security and effective risk management programs being a competitive advantage. So I want to look at this from a market-facing perspective, and obviously this is where cutting edge is. So can we talk more? Can any of you jump in on this topic of a robust risk management and security program being a competitive advantage? Talk about specific examples where you might have security guys, risk management guys as part of pursuit teams. And let's talk about that just for a couple of minutes. Anybody?
Yeah, I can. Every single SaaS company we're talking to, especially that's selling B2B, has a customer-facing security director that we've been seeing. And this is small companies and large companies, because any enterprise you're selling to, again, is going to care about your security policies. And there's a bar there, basically, that you have to meet in order to remove any sales barriers. The trick is showing them how you're able to do it better. So I've been in plenty of corporate data centers in my career, and I can tell you that very few individual organizations hold the kind of security standards that many of these cloud providers and other online companies do. And so if you're able to take what you can do and show the customer that you're going to be able to, in aggregate, provide better security than they would on their own, and it's going to be a lot cheaper than them doing it, because all the lawyers and all the auditors, it adds up, definitely. So I think that's really important to look at.
Any other insights?
I just echo that our SaaS partners that are bringing us in on opportunities, the security and the compliance folks, even versus 12 months, and the enterprises that are adapting these SaaS applications, they have an equal seat, or if not greater, in these at the table during these acquisitions of these larger platforms in the enterprise. And it's not something where the security folks are getting a heads up later on. They're baking their requirements in. So I think the cloud application providers that have the ability to really differentiate, it's not going to be an afterthought. It's going to be something that, just like features and functions of your application, the ability to win out on a scorecard on these RFPs having to do with security is going to be really important.
I would agree with that. I mean, sometimes some of the organizations we work with, the guys who come to the sales table, who are really their information security guys, and they're spending as much of their day in working with clients and helping them understand how their clients are being protected from an information security perspective as they are on managing information security itself. So it's a very interesting model, but I can tell you one that I see trending way up there because of the risk associated with information, with regulation, with compliance, and it's a very, very important role. And this is not just in big companies. I mean, this is in companies that are smaller. So before we break, I want to just give the opportunity. Any questions for our panelists here? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, on the subject that we're talking about here, in terms of all the costs and complexities, I mean, if you take kind of the classic $25 to $50 million vertical market on-premise software vendor, and they're thinking, oh, okay, I'd like to, move to the cloud. I mean, what kind of guidance can you give? I mean, is it just you ought to stick with the U.S. and maybe Canada because it's just too costly? I mean, is there any rules of thumb in terms of how much business that you need to generate to justify the cost? And I mean, how do people kind of go about it? Well, my perception is there aren't a lot of resources available to the small companies without a lot of money in order to kind of plot out the strategy to make sure that they're meeting the compliance, the privacy, the security, and data locality, which is not so much, but these are things that are barriers.
Rand, do you want to take that, or want to?
Real quick answer, and I'm sure other people have some thoughts. I would actually pose the question is, how can you afford not to? I think there'll be very few boxed software products that are gaining major market share in the next 5 years if they don't have an online component as well. I mean, Adobe just the other day announced they're killing their box product line completely and moving everything to cloud, and that's a trend we see in many of the leading enterprise companies.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think a mistake that a lot of companies make in moving to from an on-premises to a cloud model is not really building in that security or that privacy, or thinking about that from the get-go, as John had mentioned. Really security and privacy by design. And I've been called into clients' offices many times and saying, look, we're up and running. We have 50 customers or so on right now. We haven't thought about security at all. Help us. And at that point, it's much tougher to go back and re-engineer that into the product than to do it from the get-go. So.
Yeah, I would have to say that, you're in a good place. There's a lot of companies here that are in the business of helping box software companies move to the cloud and enabling that. And you know that they all have the checklists of things that you have to do to gain compliance, reduce security risks, long-term viability, and where you might want to focus your effort if you do have a desire to just stay in North America and Canada. A lot of the regs may guide you in that direction, but I think after speaking to a couple of experts in this place, you'll realize that common sense will guide you along.
Time for one more question, anybody? Yes, sir.
Maybe a huge question. The Patriot Act, is it a serious problem or not? I talked to attorneys who said, not really an issue, because it applies to any company around the world, any U.S. president, a salesperson. And whether you're running in a cloud data center in Washington State or Dublin, it doesn't make any difference. Is it a serious issue or not?
John?
Near and dear to my
It's a big
near
question.
and dear to my heart. So it's been well, I'm gonna give you the lawyer answer. It depends. No, it really depends on who you talk to. I have never seen any issue ever where there was a bigger divide between people inside the U.S. and people outside the U.S. So people inside the U.S. are like, Patriot Act, whatever, I don't care. But outside the U.S., people are maniacal about the Patriot Act in terms of how concerning it is. We are seeing a diminution a little bit in that. I think in recent years, it's the tone of the concern is a little less harsh than it was.
That wasn't quite my question, though. I know there are drivers of the U.S. Should they be, is my question. Is it really relevant? Does it change anything?
So my view is not much. Legally, not much. If you look at the laws of the United Kingdom and the laws of France, their government have the same powers, if not greater powers, because they don't have the Bill of Rights that we have, to access data held by companies under their, within their borders, as the U.S. government has under the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act expanded the powers of the U.S. government somewhat, but actually, not that much. There have always been grand juries, right, since time immemorial, where the government could get access to information without notifying the data subject, right? Secret grand juries. Similar processes are everywhere. I think there's a political aspect, right? That because the U.S. governments have been so vocal and so aggressive since 9/11 about this, it's kind of scared everybody. I don't want to say that it's not real. It is real. The powers did expand. There are certain countries like, Germany and Scandinavian countries where, the governments really don't have the kind of powers that the Patriot Act has, and there is a legitimate difference. But I think that the concerns are far overblown compared to the reality.
And will CISPA get worse?
Well, I'm sorry, what's the question?
Will CISPA get, take Patriot Act and you move on to CISPA?
Yeah, it's possible. I don't see at this point in the U.S. any, any tendency either from the administration or the Congress to become, to pay more attention to individual privacy and less attention on counterterrorism. I don't think that they're going to relax these laws very much, but I do think that there is a growing perception around the world that they're actually not as, they do not distinguish the United States from other countries as much as they thought.
Great questions. And
Anybody disagree? I'd love to hear. Do you all agree with that?
well,
Totally agree.
yeah. And actually, we'll stay for a few minutes afterwards. I want to, we have to bring our panel to a close. I want to thank each of our panelists for taking the time today to share your thoughts and insights into a series of very, very provocative topics. And thank you for joining us today and your questions. And hope you have a great rest of the conference. Thank you very much.